Mr. Secretary General, Mr. President, world leaders, and distinguished delegates, welcome to New York. It is a profound honor to stand here in my home city as a representative of the American people to address the people of the world. As millions of our citizens continue to suffer the effects of the devastating hurricanes that have struck our country, I want to begin by expressing my appreciation to every leader in this room who has offered assistance and aid. The American people are strong and resilient, and they will emerge from these hardships more determined than ever before. Fortunately, the United States has done very well since Election Day last November 8th. The stock market is at an all-time high, a record. Unemployment is at its lowest level in 16 years, and because of our regulatory and other reforms, we have more people working in the United States today than ever before. Companies are moving back, creating job growth the likes of which our country has not seen in a very long time. And it has just been announced that we will be spending almost $700 billion on our military and defense. Our military will soon be the strongest it has ever been. For more than 70 years, in times of war and peace, the leaders of nations, movements, and religions have stood before this assembly. Like them, I intend to address some of the very serious threats before us today, but also the enormous potential waiting to be unleashed. We live in a time of extraordinary opportunity. Breakthroughs in science, technology, and medicine are curing illnesses and solving problems that prior generations thought impossible to solve. But each day also brings news of growing dangers that threaten everything we cherish and value. Terrorists and extremists have gathered strength and spread to every region of the planet. Rogue regimes represented in this body not only support terrorists, but threaten other nations and their own people with the most destructive weapons known to humanity. Authority and authoritarian powers seek to collapse the values, the systems, and alliances that prevented conflict and tilted the world toward freedom since World War II. International criminal networks traffic drugs, weapons, people, force dislocation and mass migration, threaten our borders, and new forms of aggression exploit technology to menace our citizens. To put it simply, we meet at a time of both immense promise and great peril. It is entirely up to us whether we lift the world to new heights or let it fall into a valley of disrepair. We have it in our power, should we so choose, to lift millions from poverty, to help our citizens realize their dreams, and to ensure that new generations of children are raised free from violence, hatred, and fear. This institution was founded in the aftermath of 2 world wars to help shape this better future. It was based on the vision that diverse nations could cooperate to protect their sovereignty, preserve their security, and promote their prosperity. It was in the same period, exactly 70 years ago, that the United States developed the Marshall Plan to help restore Europe. Those 3 beautiful pillars, they're pillars of peace, sovereignty, security, and prosperity. The Marshall Plan was built on the noble idea that the whole world is safer when nations are strong, independent, and free. As President Truman said in his message to Congress at that time, our support of European recovery is in full accord with our support of the United Nations. The success of the United Nations depends upon the independent strength of its members. To overcome the perils of the present and to achieve the promise of the future, we must begin with the wisdom of the past. Our success depends on a coalition of strong and independent nations that embrace their sovereignty to promote security, prosperity, and peace for themselves and for the world. We do not expect diverse countries to share the same cultures, traditions, or even systems of government, but we do expect all nations to uphold these two core sovereign duties: to respect the interests of their own people and the rights of every other sovereign nation. This is the beautiful vision of this institution, and this is the foundation for cooperation and success. Strong sovereign nations let diverse countries with different values, different cultures, and different dreams not just coexist, but work side by side on the basis of mutual respect. Strong sovereign nations let their people take ownership of the future and control their own destiny. And strong sovereign nations allow individuals to flourish in the fullness of the life intended by God. In America, we do not seek to impose our way of life on anyone, but rather to let it shine as an example for everyone to watch. This week gives our country a special reason to take pride in that example. We are celebrating the 230th anniversary of our beloved Constitution, the oldest Constitution still in use in the world today. This timeless document has been the foundation of peace, prosperity, and freedom for the Americans, and for countless millions around the globe whose own countries have found inspiration in its respect for human nature, human dignity, and the rule of law. The greatest in the United States Constitution is its first three beautiful words. They are, "We the people." Generations of Americans have sacrificed to maintain the promise of those words, the promise of our country and of our great history. In America, the people govern, the people rule, and the people are sovereign. I was elected not to take power, but to give power to the American people where it belongs. In foreign affairs, we are renewing this founding principle of sovereignty. Our government's first duty is to its people, to our citizens, to serve their needs, to ensure their safety, to preserve their rights, and to defend their values. As President of the United States, I will always put America first, just like you, as the leaders of your countries, will always and should always put your countries first. All responsible leaders have an obligation to serve their own citizens, and the nation-state remains the best vehicle for elevating the human condition. But making a better life for our people also requires us to work together in close harmony and unity to create a more safe and peaceful future for all people. The United States will forever be a great friend to the world, and especially to its allies. But we can no longer be taken advantage of or enter into a one-sided deal where the United States gets nothing in return. As long as I hold this office, I will defend America's interests above all else. But in fulfilling our obligations to our own nations, we also realize that it's in everyone's interest to seek a future where all nations can be sovereign, prosperous, and secure. America does more than speak for the values expressed in the United Nations Charter. Our citizens have paid the ultimate price to defend our freedom and the freedom of many nations represented in this great hall. America's devotion is measured on the battlefields where our young men and women have fought and sacrificed alongside of our allies. From the beaches of Europe to the deserts of the Middle East to the jungles of Asia. It is an eternal credit to the American character that even after we and our allies emerged victorious from the bloodiest war in history, we did not seek territorial expansion or attempt to oppose and impose our way of life on others. Instead, we helped build institutions such as this one to defend the sovereignty, security, and prosperity for all. For the diverse nations of the world, this is our hope. We want harmony and friendship, not conflict and strife. We are guided by outcomes, not ideology. We have a policy of principled realism rooted in shared goals, interests, and values. That realism forces us to confront a question facing every leader and nation in this room. It is a question we cannot escape or avoid. We will slide down the path of complacency, numb to the challenges, threats, and even wars that we face. Or do we have enough strength and pride to confront those dangers today so that our citizens can enjoy peace and prosperity tomorrow? If we desire to lift up our citizens, if we aspire to the approval of history, then we must fulfill our sovereign duties to the people we faithfully represent. We must protect our nations, their interests, and their futures. We must reject threats to sovereignty from the Ukraine to the South China Sea. We must uphold respect for law, respect for borders, and respect for culture, and the peaceful engagement these allow. And just as the founders of this body intended, we must work together and confront together those who threaten us with chaos, turmoil, and terror. The scourge of our planet today is a small group of rogue regimes that violate every principle on which the United Nations is based. They respect neither their own citizens nor the sovereign rights of their countries. If the righteous many do not confront the wicked few, then evil will triumph. When decent people and nations become bystanders to history, the forces of destruction only gather power and strength. No one has shown more contempt for other nations and for the well-being of their own people than the depraved regime in North Korea. It is responsible for the starvation deaths of millions of North Koreans and for the imprisonment, torture, killing, and oppression of countless more. We were all witness to the regime's deadly abuse when an innocent American college student, Otto Warmbier, was returned to America only to die a few days later. We saw it in the assassination of the dictator's brother using banned nerve agents in an international airport. We know it kidnapped a sweet 13-year-old Japanese girl from a beach in her own country to enslave her as a language tutor for North Korea's spies. If this is not twisted enough, now North Korea's reckless pursuit of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles threatens the entire world with unthinkable loss of human life. It is an outrage that some nations would not only trade with such a regime, but would arm, supply, and financially support a country that imperils the world with nuclear conflict. No nation on earth has an interest in seeing this band of criminals arm itself with nuclear weapons and missiles. The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime. The United States is ready, willing, and able, but hopefully this will not be necessary. That's what the United Nations is all about. That's what the United Nations is for. Let's see how they do. It is time for North Korea to realize that the denuclearization is its only acceptable future. The United Nations Security Council recently held 2 unanimous 15-0 votes adopting hard-hitting resolutions against North Korea, and I want to thank China and Russia for joining the vote to impose sanctions along with all of the other members of the Security Council. Thank you to all involved. But we must do much more. It is time for all nations to work together to isolate the Kim regime until it ceases its hostile behavior. We face this decision not only in North Korea. It is far past time for the nations of the world to confront another reckless regime, one that speaks openly of mass murder, vowing death to America, destruction to Israel, and ruin for many leaders and nations in this room. The Iranian government masks a corrupt dictatorship behind the false guise of a democracy. It has turned a wealthy country with a rich history and culture into an economically depleted rogue state whose chief exports are violence, bloodshed, and chaos. The longest-suffering victims of Iran's leaders are, in fact, its own people. Rather than use its resources to improve Iranian lives, its oil profits go to fund Hezbollah and other terrorists that kill innocent Muslims and attack their peaceful Arab and Israeli neighbors. This wealth, which rightly belongs to Iran's people, also goes to shore up Bashar al-Assad's dictatorship, fuel Yemen's civil war, and undermine peace throughout the entire Middle East. We cannot let a murderous regime continue these destabilizing activities while building dangerous missiles, and we cannot abide by an agreement if it provides cover for the eventual construction of a nuclear program. The Iran deal was one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the United States has ever entered into. Frankly, that deal is an embarrassment to the United States, and I don't think you've heard the last of it, believe me. It is time for the entire world to join us in demanding that Iran's government end its pursuit of death and destruction. It is time for the regime to free all Americans and citizens of other nations that they have unjustly detained. And above all, Iran's government must stop supporting terrorists, begin serving its own people, and respect the sovereign rights of its neighbors. The entire world understands that the good people of Iran want change. And other than the vast military power of the United States, that Iran's people are what their leaders fear the most. This is what causes the regime to restrict internet access, tear down satellite dishes, shoot unarmed student protesters, and imprison political reformers. Oppressive regimes cannot endure forever, and the day will come when the people will face a choice. Will they continue down the path of poverty, bloodshed, and terror? Or will the Iranian people return to the nation's proud roots as a center of civilization, culture, and wealth, where their people can be happy and prosperous once again? The Iranian regime's support for terror is in stark contrast to the recent commitments of many of its neighbors to fight terrorism and halt its financing. In Saudi Arabia early last year, I was greatly honored to address the leaders of more than 50 Arab and Muslim nations. We agreed that all responsible nations must work together to confront terrorists and the Islamic extremism that inspires them. We will stop radical Islamic terrorism because we cannot allow it to tear up our nation and indeed to tear up the entire world. We must deny the terrorists safe haven, transit, funding, and any form of support for their vile and sinister ideology. We must drive them out of our nations. It is time to expose and hold responsible those countries who support and finance terror groups like Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, the Taliban, and others that slaughter innocent people. The United States and our allies are working together throughout the Middle East to crush the loser terrorists and stop the reemergence of safe havens they use to launch attacks on all of our people. Last month, I announced a new strategy for victory in the fight against this evil in Afghanistan. From now on, our security interests will dictate the length and scope of military operations, not arbitrary benchmarks and timetables set up by politicians. I have also totally changed the rules of engagement in our fight against the Taliban and other terrorist groups. In Syria and Iraq, we have made big gains toward lasting defeat of ISIS. In fact, our country has achieved more against ISIS in the last 8 months than it has in many, many years combined. We seek the de-escalation of the Syrian conflict and a political solution that honors the will of the Syrian people. The actions of the criminal regime of Bashar al-Assad, including the use of chemical weapons against his own citizens, even innocent children, shock the conscience of every decent person. No society can be safe if banned chemical weapons are allowed to spread. That is why the United States carried out a missile strike on the airbase that launched the attack. We appreciate the efforts of the United Nations agencies that are providing vital humanitarian assistance in areas liberated from ISIS, and we especially thank Jordan, Turkey, and Lebanon for their role in hosting refugees from the Syrian conflict. The United States is a compassionate nation and has spent billions and billions of dollars in helping to support this effort. we seek an approach to refugee resettlement that is designed to help these horribly treated people and which enables their eventual return to their home countries to be part of the rebuilding process. For the cost of resettling one refugee in the United States, we can assist more than 10 in their home region. Out of the goodness of our hearts, we offer financial assistance to hosting countries in the region, and we support recent agreements of the G20 nations that will seek to host refugees as close to their home countries as possible. This is the safe, responsible, and humanitarian approach. For decades, the United States has dealt with migration challenges here in the Western Hemisphere. We have learned that over the long term, uncontrolled migration is deeply unfair to both the sending and the receiving countries. For the sending countries, it reduces domestic pressure to pursue needed political and economic reform, and drains them of the human capital necessary to motivate and implement those reforms. For the receiving countries, the substantial costs of uncontrolled migration are borne overwhelmingly by low-income citizens whose concerns are often ignored by both media and government. I want to salute the work of the United Nations in seeking to address the problems that cause people to flee from their homes. The United Nations and African Union led peacekeeping missions to have invaluable contributions in stabilizing conflicts in Africa. The United States continues to lead the world in humanitarian assistance, including famine prevention and relief in South Sudan, Somalia, and northern Nigeria and Yemen. We have invested in better health and opportunity all over the world through programs like PEPFAR, which funds AIDS relief, the President's Malaria Initiative, the Global Health Security Agenda, the Global Fund to End Modern Slavery, and the Woman Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative, part of our commitment to empowering women all across the globe. We also thank the Secretary General for recognizing that the United Nations must reform if it is to be an effective partner in confronting threats to sovereignty, security, and prosperity. Too often, the focus of this organization has not been on results, but on bureaucracy and process. In some cases, states that seek to subvert this institution's noble aims have hijacked the very systems that are supposed to advance them. For example, it is a massive source of embarrassment to the United Nations that some governments with egregious human rights records sit on the UN Human Rights Council. The United States is one out of 193 countries in the United Nations, and yet we pay 22% of the entire budget and more. In fact, we pay far more than anybody realizes. The United States bears an unfair cost burden, but to be fair, if it could actually accomplish all of its stated goals, especially the goal of peace, this investment would easily be well worth it. Major portions of the world are in conflict, and some, in fact, are going to hell. But the powerful people in this room, under the guidance and auspices of the United Nations, can solve many of these vicious and complex problems. The American people hope that one day soon the United Nations can be a much more accountable and effective advocate for human dignity and freedom around the world. In the meantime, we believe that no nation should have to bear a disproportionate share of the burden, militarily or financially. Nations of the world must take a greater role in promoting secure and prosperous societies in their own regions. That is why in the Western Hemisphere, the United States has stood against the corrupt, destabilizing regime in Cuba and embraced the enduring dream of the Cuban people to live in freedom. My administration recently announced that we will not lift sanctions on the Cuban government until it makes fundamental reforms. We have also imposed tough, calibrated sanctions on the socialist Maduro regime in Venezuela, which has brought a once thriving nation to the brink of total collapse. The socialist dictatorship of Nicolas Maduro has inflicted terrible pain and suffering on the good people of that country. This corrupt regime destroyed a prosperous nation by imposing a failed ideology that has produced poverty and misery everywhere it has been tried. To make matters worse, Maduro has defied his own people, stealing power from their elected representatives to preserve his disastrous rule. The Venezuelan people are starving, and their country is collapsing. Their democratic institutions are being destroyed. This situation is completely unacceptable, and we cannot stand by and watch. As a responsible neighbor and friend, we and all others have a goal. That goal is to help them regain their freedom, recover their country, and restore their democracy. I would like to thank leaders in this room for condemning the regime and providing vital support to the Venezuelan people. The United States has taken important steps to hold the regime accountable. We are prepared to take further action if the government of Venezuela persists on its path to impose authoritarian rule on the Venezuelan people. We are fortunate to have incredibly strong and healthy trade relationships with many of the Latin American countries gathered here today. Our economic bond forms a critical foundation for advancing peace and prosperity for all of our people and all of our neighbors.
All right, folks, my name is Jen. I'm from Golden State Times. The press briefing is set to start soon. I just want to update you guys on what's going on. So this is a press briefing by Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. He's going to talk about a few things. One, he's going to talk about interest rates from the Fed. And two, he's going to be talking about North Korean sanctions. If you guys saw earlier today, President Donald Trump announced that he was going to sign an executive order to have more sanctions on North Korea. As of right now, the sanctions are almost at 90%. 90%, folks. So the sanctions are already really tight. There's really not much more room for any more sanctions after this. Okay, if North Korea continues their crazy, out of control ways, the next step is going to be military intervention. Okay, there is no more sanctions after this. So Steve Mnuchin is going to be talking about this, and he's going to answer questions from the press of what these sanctions are. Because again, the sanctions at North Korea are already at 90%. Okay, so, and just today, we broke the story that that China was going to stop any business. Chinese banks were going to stop any business with North Korea. Okay, existing and new accounts. So this is pretty huge. And Steve Mnuchin is going to go in depth when he talks about this in just a few minutes. So it's set to start soon. And we're going to just keep watching this for a little while. And then Steve Mnuchin should be coming up on your screen. And we'll go on from there. So let me just back it up just a little bit. Here we go. So thank you very much, everyone. Please share the stream. Please give it a thumbs up and all that good stuff. So here we go. Let's just continue listening to President Trump as we wait for Steve Mnuchin.
From their homes. The United Nations and African Union led peacekeeping missions to have invaluable contributions in stabilizing conflicts in Africa. The United States continues to lead the world in humanitarian assistance, including famine prevention and relief in South Sudan, Somalia, and northern Nigeria and Yemen. We have invested in better health and opportunity all over the world through programs like PEPFAR, which funds AIDS relief, the President's Malaria Initiative, the Global Health Security Agenda, the Global Fund to End Modern Slavery, and the Woman Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative, part of our commitment to empowering women all across the globe. We also thank the Secretary General for recognizing that the United Nations must reform if it is to be an effective partner in confronting threats to sovereignty, security, and prosperity. Too often, the focus of this organization has not been on results, but on bureaucracy and process. In some cases, states that seek to subvert this institution's noble aims have hijacked the very systems that are supposed to advance them. For example, it is a massive source of embarrassment to the United Nations that some governments with egregious human rights records sit on the UN Human Rights Council. The United States is one out of 193 countries in the United Nations, and yet we pay 22% of the entire budget and more. In fact, we pay far more than anybody realizes. The United States bears an unfair cost burden, but to be fair, if it could actually accomplish all of its stated goals, especially the goal of peace, this investment would easily be well worth it. Major portions of the world are in conflict, and some, in fact, are going to hell. But the powerful people in this room, under the guidance and auspices of the United Nations, can solve many of these vicious and complex problems. The American people hope that one day soon the United Nations can be a much more accountable and effective advocate for human dignity and freedom around the world. In the meantime, we believe that no nation should have to bear a disproportionate.
All right, folks. So we are about to get footage from inside the press briefing at the with Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. So stay tuned. It's starting really soon. We're getting footage in just a few minutes. It should be coming up on your screen. Thank you very much, like I said, for joining us. Share the stream, and I'll see you guys on the chat.
Nations of the world must take a greater role in promoting secure and prosperous societies in their own regions. That is why in the Western Hemisphere, the United States has stood against the corrupt, destabilizing regime in Cuba and embraced the enduring dream of the Cuban people to live in freedom. My administration recently announced that we will not lift sanctions on the Cuban government until it makes fundamental reforms. We have also imposed tough, calibrated sanctions on the socialist Maduro regime in Venezuela, which has brought a once thriving nation to the brink of total collapse. The socialist dictatorship of Nicolas Maduro has inflicted terrible pain and suffering on the good people of that country. This corrupt regime destroyed a prosperous nation by imposing a failed ideology that has produced poverty and misery everywhere it has been tried. To make matters worse, Maduro has defied his own people, stealing power from their elected representatives to preserve his disastrous rule. The Venezuelan people are starving, and their country is collapsing. Their democratic institutions are being destroyed. This situation is completely unacceptable, and we cannot stand by and watch. As a responsible neighbor and friend, we and all others have a goal. That goal is to help them regain their freedom, recover their country, and restore their democracy. I would like to thank leaders in this room for condemning the regime and providing vital support to the Venezuelan people. The United States has taken important steps to hold the regime accountable. We are prepared to take further action if the government of Venezuela persists on its path to impose authoritarian rule on the Venezuelan people. We are fortunate to have incredibly strong and healthy trade relationships with many of the Latin American countries gathered here today. Our economic bond.
All right, folks, so this is live footage from inside the press briefing where Steve Mnuchin, Treasury Secretary, is going to have a press conference regarding North Korean sanctions and also other issues that are coming up. So make sure that you guys share this stream and also give it a thumbs up. Another issue that Steve Mnuchin is going to be talking about is that Chinese banks are stopping any interaction in any business with North Korea. So this is just another example that everybody's turning their back on North Korea. So he's going to be answering a lot of questions regarding that. So stay tuned. My name is Jen. I'm from Golden State Times. I'm the host of the stream. I would like to ask you to please share this stream and give it a thumbs up. Thank you very much, everyone, and I'll see you guys in the chat.
Kids to rate, you know? It's not a matter of, I just, I want to be with my quest. But otherwise, I told her, I said, you don't like working in the winter. You don't like working in the snow. You don't like working in the hurricane. You don't like working in the I say, but they're over it now. They gave up. Yeah, is that you?
Katie, when are you going home? What's today, Thursday? Like Friday. Tonight.
That's what keeps you going. Shit show. I mean, people pay to get in So do the city. I wanted to get my pictures taken.
So change the verb to I CC'd you.
There you go. Where was the football? Oh, so you got even more. It's a January. You got to have to go in September. Well, I never knew it every March. So you yeah, somewhere down there. And the thing that kills me is when the protesters show up. Oh yeah, we forgot about the protesters. There's that.
I'm actually from New York. I haven't seen it's the first year
It's like there's so many different things going on. You know, the criminals come in. Oh yeah.
And actually, you know, I briefly considered getting their name. The old, we used to, never mind the toy, we used to use the yellow pellets. You can squeeze it. That was a big game in my elementary school. Big contrast was go to the little bit across from school and say, I have, you know, 4 friends that you spend and then you go down to the little boxes and say, like, 5 and they would keep track for you until the top.
did find my cord. It was in the file at the Palace Hotel. And the other thing that happened is Janet did end up being too sick to come back and stay. So he told Jen Jacobs that she had to go to Westminster and take all the entire weekend. And that came after they told us. They could have just asked me, like, so my stuff in So I got familiar with probably my too. I walked in and I'm like, I have to be home by Saturday. Like, I have to be home on Saturday, so I still have the whole thing on Sunday. And I have kids stuff and I have booked Friday, which is fine. I can't do it. I just wanted to head up on one of those gems to make it for the Epstein's fever. Anyway, they were totally doing this college. It's much easier because we're not on our first one. It's great, but for like an hour. So I wasn't going to do it.
Wednesdays when they have the work. So you see Wednesday, every Wednesday, because these guys were outside or they were getting together. The Cadillac got together. I think it was on Wednesday also. See my feet. But yeah, that's the thing that's what that was always. Otherwise it's not great.
Stand it up and present.
Some of the people were coming across. Some people
Okay.
lifting. Yeah, yeah. That's correct. That's correct. Yeah, let's go now. Yeah. Well, they don't have like that. Kind of sort of. Yeah, that's exactly right. It happens fast too. It unfolds quickly. To me, it's like a season. It's like a flower.
I know, but I just want to be twice as lucky. So I just want to check in one of the reasons you didn't see it? It was like, you know, yesterday.
Claire, I'm going to put this on, okay? If the lady behind you can move. Hey, Kristen? The lady behind you. Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you. You can sit down. Whatever you want.
Oh my God, that was just the front mic.
Does that mean all the does that mean all the templates that you did? They were still used, right? That you worked so hard on?
Oh, what? Did everyone hear my entire conversation right now in that corner? No. Oh, good. It was about that, actually.
Oh, wow.
You mean because of my power cord?
No, because you're not in the pool.
Oh, I've been in the pool all day. I just swapped out 10 minutes ago and ran and hobbled over here. No, this just happened. This just happened like an hour ago. It was like, change of plans. Everything's different. I'm like, okay.
Was your conversation just now about templates?
I'll tell you what it was, but later.
I was just
Not
thinking,
around this
yeah,
way.
okay. No, I just was thinking of sitting with you last night and you were working on it. I hope that it was still kind of
I leave it on your stuff. I'm not going to turn it over.
Yeah, so, I mean, I have my front mic on my camera right now, just plug that in, so you're going to get some ambient from that. I can turn that down. Hey, Carrie. Is it your dangly little floor right here?
I'm going to leave people call in case they talk to you.
It's okay.
Hello.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see you. Glad to be here with all of you. Been a very productive week at the United Nations. I've been pleased to be here with the President. Today, the President he signed an executive order that strengthened the U.S. government's ability to cut off funding to the North Korean regime and its weapons development program. Despite multiple UN Security Council resolutions, North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un continues to threaten the world and his neighbors with provocative nuclear and missile tests. President Trump's new executive order significantly expands Treasury's authorities to target those who enable this regime's economic activity wherever they are located. For too long, North Korea has evaded sanctions and used the international financial system to facilitate funding for its weapons and mass destruction and ballistic missile programs. No bank in any country should be used to facilitate Kim Jong-un's destructive behavior. This new executive order will authorize Treasury to impose a range of sanctions, such as suspending U.S. correspondent account access to any foreign bank that knowingly conducts or facilitates significant transactions tied to trade with North Korea. These sanctions will be forward-looking and applied to behavior that occurs following today when President Trump signed the executive order. Foreign financial institutions are now on notice that going forward, they can choose to do business with the United States or with North Korea, but not both. This new executive order enables Treasury to freeze assets of anyone conducting significant trade in goods, services, or technology with North Korea. It also allows us to freeze assets of actors supporting North Korea's textile, fishing, IT, and manufacturing industries. We call on all countries around the world to join us by cutting off all trade and financial ties with North Korea in order to achieve a denuclearized Korean peninsula. As President Trump stated in his speech to the UN General Assembly, it is time for all nations to work together to isolate the Kim regime until it ceases its hostile behavior. We will continue to work with our allies and partners to stop North Korea from using the global financial system to further Kim's reckless behavior. Thank you, and I'd be happy to take a few questions.
Mr. Secretary, Jeff Mason from Reuters. Can you explain how this will affect China specifically, and what kind of discussions you or your counterparts or others in the administration have had with them about this?
Well, let me comment. I had a very productive conversation very early this morning with Governor Zhou at the PBOC, the People's Bank of China, and how we are going to work together. This action is directed at everyone. It is in no way specifically directed at China, and we look forward to working very, very closely with them.
But China is its biggest trading partner.
Mr. Secretary, can I just read a quick section of the EO? I want to understand what's happening. No aircraft in which a foreign person has an interest that has landed at a place in North Korea may land at a place in the United States within 180 days after departure from North Korea. And then the similar application to vessels. Is there any way you could put a number on how many ships or aircraft would have been affected by this in pick a year, pick the last applicable year, so we can get a sense of the scale of the EO that's in that?
Again, that's another important aspect of the EO. Besides for us being able to block financial transactions, we'll be working very closely with the Coast Guard and others on this. I'm not prepared to give you a number, but it's very significant. And further, we can put actions against ports as well.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. First one, why will this round of sanctions work when others have failed?
Again, let me be clear. First of all, I don't think other sanctions have failed, but these sanctions are very significant because not only does it allow us to sanction individuals or entities, but it allows us to freeze or block any transactions with any financial institution anywhere in the world that facilitates any transactions with the blocked person.
And just to be very clear, do these sanctions include a plan to target North Korean companies and individuals around the world?
Yes, it does.
And any plans for future sanctions?
Again, I will never comment on future sanctions, but we will continue to review all options.
Rule it out in the coming days?
Does this represent in any way a rejection or a moving past the UN Security Council?
No, I don't think in any way. We very much appreciate the UN Security Council resolution and the unanimous support to that. This goes beyond it.
What does this do that you couldn't get done through the Security Council?
Again, as I've mentioned, this allows us to block any financial institution that doesn't follow through on the UN sanctions or our additional sanctions. Yeah, over here.
When do you expect, sorry, it's Andrew Beatty from AFP. When do you expect to make designations under this authority?
Again, we'll do designations on a rolling basis. They obviously start with all activity today, so this is forward-looking. This is not backwards-looking.
Secondly, sorry, can you say more about your discussions with the Central Bank of China? What do you understand the scope of their order?
Again, those conversations are confidential, but as I said, I had a very productive conversation with them this morning.
Jonathan Lear, FAP, piggybacking on that, is there anything, just the timeline of it, have there been previous negotiations leading to this point with the bank in China?
No, there were no previous negotiations. First time we discussed it was early this morning, our time.
Who broached the subject first, Mr. Secretary?
I did. I called them to alert them of this in advance, given their close cooperation with us.
Thank you. It's Margaret Tolive with Bloomberg. So I wanted to ask part of the same question, which is that China had given some indication a week and a half ago or so of some action. What they did today is completely separate from what they had indicated earlier. And
again, I'm not going to make any comments about what they did earlier, but what they did today, I assume, was as a result of our conversation.
Can I ask my other?
Well, why don't we come back to you just so we can get other people in here?
Paul Stoney from the Wall Street Journal. Do you believe that China's actions today reduce the need for further secondary sanctions on Chinese entities?
Again, I just comment we look forward to working with them in a very cooperative way, the way we look forward to working with all of our partners. And again, what's important about this is the additional authorities the Treasury has.
Sorry, Peter Baker from the New York Times. Can you put this in the context of the president's speech earlier in the week when he talked about a more military action? I mean, how do these things work together, and what do you expect North Korea to do in response?
I'm not going to comment on what I expect North Korea to do. Obviously, as what we've said is the objective is for them to stop their missile tests and give up their nuclear weapons. As it relates to this is something that has been in the works for a while. I alluded to this. I believe it was about 2 weeks ago that I had been discussing this with the president, and this was all part of the president's strategy at the UN this week.
Thank you. Secretary Tillerson had said it took a while for the last round of sanctions to actually have an impact or for North Korea to begin to feel them. Is there a timeline that you're looking at, in which case?
Again, there's no timeline we're looking at. This is forward action on this. Again, I would just emphasize that we hope that there is voluntary cooperation, but to the extent that we have to cut off banks from the banking system in the United States, which obviously would be very significant, we now have those tools to do that.
Call any other country's central bank?
I'm not going to make any other comments on confidential discussions I've had with other countries. Again, I am confirming that I did speak to them this morning. I'm not going to comment on other confidential discussions.
Yes, thank you. Lisa Rose with NHK. Secretary, the president earlier thanked Xi Jinping for his bold actions, but would you say that these actions today were enough? And also, would you call on Russia to put more pressure on North Korea?
Again, we will call on Russia to do more. President Trump and President Xi have had very productive conversations, and we appreciate the way they're working with us. I'm going to take one more.
I'll just follow up on my initial question. You said that this was not targeted at China specifically, but China is the largest trading partner with North Korea. So can you spell out how this will affect them and how it will affect the U.S. relationship with China with regard to North Korea?
Again, as I emphasized earlier, This is targeted at North Korea and anybody that wants to do trade or business with them. And we appreciate the relationship with China, and we look forward to working with them. Thank you, everybody.
All right, folks. So that was Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. We already knew that President Trump was going to sign an executive order to have more sanctions on North Korea, but we didn't know exactly what those sanctions were. But now we know that they are basically banning any bank from doing business with North Korea. And I think that that's really going to be the last nail on the coffin of North Korea. And they have one option, and that is give up your nukes or get destroyed. Okay, this is literally this is the last straw for North Korea. That's it. There is no more sanctions after this. We had already sanctioned them 90% before this. So now we're just really, really close to 100%, and North Korea has no other option than to give up your nukes or get destroyed, one or the other. You know, so it's pretty crazy stuff. Nikki Haley, which is the ambassador to the UN, is going to have a press briefing in just a few minutes. So if you are new to the community, make sure that you guys click that subscribe button and the notification bell. We're going to shut this down, and then we're going to go to the press briefing of Nikki Haley. She's going to be talking about North Korea, more on the sanctions from a political standpoint, and also going to be talking about other issues that are going on in the UN right now. So there's a lot to talk about, and Nikki Haley's going to have a press briefing in just a few minutes. Let me just take a minute to also shout out our moderators that are on the chat, keeping the chat clean and enjoyable for everyone. Carolyn Hall was there. Also Brian Knight was there. And if, who else was on here? And other moderators too that pop in once in a while whenever they have time. Thank you very much for joining us. Another thing, we are now publishing news articles on our website, stuff that we do not cover here on the channel, we cover on our website, or vice versa. All right. So if you guys want to stay up to date on everything that is going on regarding politics, news, everything that is going on, breaking news, all that stuff, you guys can check it out both here on the channel on YouTube. So subscribe, and also on our website, which is goldenstatetimes.com/news. Again, that's goldenstatetimes.com/news. So make sure you guys head over there and check it out. And thank you very much for joining us. My name is Jen. I'm from Golden State Times, and I'll see you soon. Remember, goldenstatetimes.com/news.